of Anbar province on Tuesday. These border cities are among those under the control of the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, or ISIS, which seeks to create an Islamic caliphate that encompasses parts of Iraq and Syria. And by the way, they will not stop there. This is a very big deal, that Assad's forces are now striking inside of Iraq. Gives you a very clear sense of just how quickly this is becoming not a civil war, but a regional sectarian war. The Middle East, as you know, is broken up with countless different sects and religions, but the two main sects of Islam, Sunni and Shia, essentially come to a head inside of Iraq. But there are a few other places where you have a Shia majority, or at least a Shia government. You have a minority in Syria, in the Alawite Shia community that runs that country, part of the Assad dynasty. You now have Shia in Iran and Shia inside of Syria coming to the aid of Shia inside of Iraq and the Shia government in Baghdad. This has now gone from proxy war to regional war. Proxy war is more, we're sending over weapons, we're trying to assist, we're doing what they can to prop up their favorite fighters, factions, sides in this whole thing. But what this is a whole new level. This would be Syria using its own troops, its own forces, to be an active combatant in the Iraq civil war. They're launching airstrikes against ISIS inside of Iraq. Keep in mind, this is a violation of Iraqi airspace and sovereign territory. We still now have a government in Baghdad that is recognized by the international community as the only government inside that country. And I have a feeling that there's a lot of people who are going to be pretty upset about the fact that Syrian airplanes are now flying over Sunni Arab parts of Iraq and dropping bombs and killing dozens of people. At least 57 killed, 120 wounded. Always remember, by the way, when you're looking at these sorts of, this is not like people that were wounded when a car went into a crowd or something. When you're talking about bombing raids and wounded, you're talking about people that have lost limbs, that are horribly scarred. So the casualties are always greater than people think of them as, because we just think of the dead more so than the wounded in these kinds of strikes, but there will be many, many dozens of severely wounded as a result of the missiles or bombs that were dropped in this case. So this is, as I said, a major step towards this becoming a broader civil war throughout the region, a civil war between Sunni and Shia. So that's very problematic. You also, by the way, have Iran, which is now, and this is according to the New York Times today, is directing surveillance drones over Iraq from an airfield in Baghdad and is secretly supplying Iraq with tons of military equipment, supplies, and other assistance. Tehran has also deployed an intelligence unit there to intercept communications. So while the U.S. is sitting around sort of thinking and having this debate, well, how much are we going to do? And we got President Obama who's out there saying, we're not going to do much. We're not going to do dumb stuff. We're not going to do smart stuff. We're going to send some troops. We're going to do some stuff. We're going to take the fight to the terrorists. And I'm not really clear beyond that what's going to happen. But I'm not going to get boots on the ground. Only a couple boots. And tie laces tight. Don't want their feet to hurt. So he's saying that essentially we're going to do something, and we've sent some troops there now. But guess what? Syria is launching airstrikes. Iran is sending in its own soldiers or its own intelligence officers, depending on who we're talking about. At least part of this comes from what's known as the Quds Force, which is a external unit of the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. That's sort of like their Spec Ops and CIA, in a sense, rolled into one. They have security responsibility for Iran outside of Iran's borders. They've been involved in all kinds of terrorism and assassination and all the rest. So there is a lot of arms and munitions as well going from Iran into Iraq. Now, this is where things can get even uglier. So we already know that the two neighboring Shia powers, the Alawite regime of Assad to the west in Syria and the mullahs in Tehran, the Iranian government to the east of Iraq, they're now involved. They're directly involved. They don't care. They're not waiting for a UN resolution. They're not sitting around saying, hey, well, didn't Dick Cheney say we'd be welcomed as liberators? They're going past that. They're not pointing out that all these Democrats now that love to poke fun at the neocons all voted for the Iraq War. They're not getting into that. They're just doing what they think is in their immediate interest. They pursue their immediate interest without apology and without hesitation. Something that maybe this administration should begin to think about, although I don't think the administration of Barack Obama is particularly capable of determining what U.S. interest actually is. They think our interest is to ignore, beg forgiveness, apologize, give some speeches. I don't really know. Finally, I ask you, it's almost like I'm asking for somebody to, what's the old Greek in ancient Greece looking for an honest man with the lantern? Find me the foreign policy victory of the Obama administration. We can't do it. Iraq is now well beyond our control, and all the measures we're talking about are just going to be drops in a much larger bucket. You're talking about 2,000 Shiite militiamen have already been mobilized in southern Iraq. By the way, the numbers right now, and this should be sort of eerie for those of you who were active participants in the U.S. coalition in Iraq, you'll probably recall what the rough estimates were for how many insurgents the U.S. was fighting inside of Iraq, Sunni Arab jihadist insurgents. We're talking about 10, 15, maybe 20,000 max. Actual fighters. We used to call them pipe swingers. I don't know why, but I miss some of this terminology. There's door kickers, snake eaters, pipe swingers. But a discussion for another time. The current assessment of ISIS in Iraq right now, guess what? About 7,000 to 10,000. So you have a roughly equivalent force level of jihadists flying the black banners of Khorasan right now inside of Iraq that were there when you had a massive U.S. force with the best of the best in place to try to suppress them. The Iraqi government is going to have a very, very hard time at this. Right now, they're just trying to stop the offensive. They're not even really going on major offense yet. That's when things get particularly ugly, because what these insurgents are best at is not seizing and holding territory. That's kind of new for them, actually. What they're best at is placing IEDs, improvised explosive devices, setting up ambushes, assassination and other violent coercion techniques. And they're going to be operating as an insurgency, and that's what they're best at. And by the way, many of them were fighting the U.S. as insurgents. So you can imagine now they are very well placed. They are veterans. They are terrorist insurgent veterans when it comes to waging that kind of warfare. And so the Iraqi government now trying to take back these areas and become the actual government, come back in charge of these parts of the country is going to be incredibly difficult. But don't worry, we've got a plan for all this. It's all good. We're going to make it happen. And the way we're going to make it happen is President Obama wants a political settlement. He's got John Kerry over there right now. They're asking for them to come together. Now, this is the problem with that. And I think it's a recurring problem in this administration. A combination of just an unbelievable arrogance, right? John Kerry, President Obama, trust me, despite all the criticism they're getting on foreign policy, they still think they're the smartest guys in the room. Nobody with an IQ over 100, I think, could agree with them, but they still think they're the smartest guys in the room. So you have that, but you also have recent history. The U.S. tried to help tried to help bring into existence a multi-sectarian, multi-confessional democracy inside of Iraq that would have some respect for minorities and minority groups there and all the rest. That was when we had what you would call leverage. A lot of leverage. We had 150,000 U.S. troops on the ground. We were the authority. We were the force of the state. The Iraqi government was riding in the way, way, way distant back seat during that period of time. If we weren't able then to bring these players to the table and get them to come up with a political framework that allows them to stop squabbling, stop poking each other in the eye with sharp sticks, and actually try to sit down and come up with a better tomorrow for this country, which, granted, from an ethno-sectarian perspective, is sort of like the Yugoslavia of the Middle East. It doesn't really make any sense. But, a lot of countries don't make any sense. in terms of the ethnic and sectarian makeup. And they don't necessarily all start trying to kill each other. But if we couldn't do that then, what makes us think we would be able to do that now? That is what I want to know. I want to know why the Obama administration thinks that right now they can actually act as some kind of a broker here. Sure, Baghdad, as I have said, and as I wrote about on The Blaze, is not going to fall, but that doesn't really mean a whole lot. I mean, you don't want Maliki to be derided, as so many times we've heard of Hamid Karzai in Kabul. People used to call Karzai the mayor of Kabul. You know, technically he's supposed to be running the country, but we called him the mayor of Kabul. We don't want Maliki to be the mayor of Baghdad. We don't want him to be a guy who only runs part of the country. But then there's this other wrinkle into this whole plan as well, by the way. There's this other problem with all of this. And that is, okay, so you form a unity government. That will give them a greater ability to actually fight back against ISIS. But ISIS doesn't want any part of a unity government. In fact, quite the opposite. They would prefer very much to be facing some kind of a unified Shia front to turn this into a sectarian civil war. That's what they're trying to do. That's what they're hoping they can accomplish here. And so for all the talk from the administration and everything, we need to start seeing it in these terms. The other question I have for you, the other issue is it going to be a launch pad for terrorist attacks? Well, here's Dick Cheney, who was on the Hugh Hewitt radio show yesterday, and he made a claim that I think we need to at least hear ourselves, which is that there'll be an attack worse than 9/11 in the coming decade. Listen to what Cheney had to say on Hugh Hewitt.
Do you think we get through this decade without a massive attack on the homeland?
I doubt it. I think there will be another attack. And the next time, I think it's likely to be far deadlier than the last one. Just imagine what would happen if somebody could smuggle a nuclear device, put it in a shipping container, and drive it down the Beltway outside Washington, D.C.
By the way, if that were to happen, do you see the government reconstituting? Because it would have to be military rule for a period of time at least.
Well, there was some years ago a program called the Continuity of Government Program. It was part of the Cold War strategy that we pursued here, and it involved.
Well, you get the basic idea. I don't mean to cut off the former vice president, but yeah, he's talking about what would happen if we got hit with a nuke in a shipping container. I think so much of the divide right now over what to do in Iraq, if anything, has to do with, do you believe Cheney? Is Iraq going to become a launch pad for an attack, and will that attack be even more deadly and devastating than 9/11? If the answer is yes, well, then you don't want 300 troops. You want something much more substantial than that. If the answer is no, maybe we let them fight it out. Not our problem. I think that's the divide right now, certainly on the Republican side. On the Democrat side, the divide is, how do we get the American people to really believe that the IRS can't find emails from 2 years ago? But, you know, they got their priorities. After this, we're going to talk a little bit about the election results for the Mississippi election that just came in. Much more. Team Buck, don't go anywhere.
You're listening to Buck Sexton, only on the Blaze Radio Network. Buck Sexton.
So there was an election that happened. We got the results in. As you know, Glenn talked about this on his show earlier this morning. Thet Cochran won Mississippi, and the margin of victory, the six-term senator, Cochran, won 50.8% of the votes to 49.2% for McDaniel, the Tea Party-backed challenger. And that's the way it is. Although I'm actually seeing, I've heard some rumors, or I should say rather I've read some rumors at this point, that there may be a challenge to this, that they may actually challenge the end result. Real quick, here's what, before we bring in a special guest, here's what Ted Cruz had to say about this defeat for a Tea Party-backed candidate on Fox News. Listen.
Well,